Ladies and gentlemen, this is Robert P. Fitton. I've been doing podcasts to promote my books since last summer, and I wanted to promote a whole wide range of books. That's got a little bit diverted since the advent of the 8-part miniseries based on the novel 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I'm hoping this is the last installment of that, but there's one point that I really wanted to make. I just finished watching episode 7 just within the last 10 minutes. And what I wanted to say was there was a scene of Lee Oswald going into the Texas School Book Depository, and he has a long, huge package that obviously looks like a rifle, not even close to the description in the Warren Commission or anybody else's description. And what I wanted to do first, before I play some chapters, was to play back some highlights of what Buell said about Lee Oswald and about that package and about bringing a rifle to the depository. Listen to what this man who was there, who brought Lee Oswald to work that morning, what he said 6 months ago in 2015. Because if you understand what he's saying, and he's saying it very tearfully, very truthfully, and with great emotion, and when you understand that and then you watch what is presented in that miniseries, it's completely different.
You believe that Oswald killed Kennedy?
Honestly, I don't think he did. Before that fateful day of November the 22nd, 1963, very few people knew who Lee Harvey Oswald was. But before that day was over, his name was broadcast probably worldwide. The first time I met Lee was in front of my supervisor's office, William Shelley, and we referred to him as Bill. So he called me to his office, and when I got down there was a young man standing there, and he introduced me to Lee, and he said, Lee is going to be working with us. And he says, what I want you to do, and at that time I went by the name of Wesley, my middle name. He said, Wesley, he said, I want you to teach Lee how to fill orders as well as you. And I said, well, I'll do my best. Well, for a couple of days, Lee was just like my shadow. Everywhere I would go, Lee was there. And he was watching and he was learning. So one morning, like I said, a couple of days, third day, I walked in and I said to myself, I said, let's see how much he's learned. And so I got a clipboard and I took some of the easy orders I would fill and I'd put on the clipboard. And I said, today, I said, we're going to find out where you are. And I said, if you have any questions, I said, be sure to come and find me and ask me. Well, the thing that impressed me was that he wasn't scared. He took the clipboard and he says, fine, I'll see what I can do. And Lee was a very quick learner, and I enjoyed that. I guess that's the teacher in me. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to teach people in different types of employment. Lee was a great worker. always on time, always was looking for something to do. And I always told him, I said, if you finish the orders on your clipboard, you come find me, and I'll get some more for you. Well, if you think, probably in your own life, if you work with someone, how many people have that attitude, that kind of energy? I guess, as I look back over the time, I think I was very fortunate. I got to see a side of Lee Oswald that most people will never have. When you read about him, all you hear is terrible things. You don't read that. That Lee was very good with children. And he loved them. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, I was living with my sister and her husband at that time with 3 little girls. And just listening to them talk about Mr. Lee. The games he would play around a big oak tree. And by the way, if you ever have the opportunity to come to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that large oak tree still stands there today. It stands before a house that was once owned by Ruth Payne. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that name, Ruth Payne. She was the lady that Marina was living with in Irving, Texas. And by the way, it was down the block from where my sister and brother-in-law and their home was. There's only about a half a block on the same side of the street. And a lot of the children in the neighborhood, that was a place they would congregate in the afternoon, especially on Friday afternoon, because that's the day Lee would ride home with me. And by the way, how did that start? Well, when Lee first started there, I found out from talking with him that his wife lived in Irving, Texas. And I said, that's interesting, because I said, that's where I live currently. And he told me the address of where his wife was living, and I said, well, that's right down the street from where I lived. I said, would you like a ride out to Irving? And at that time, I didn't know that he was living in a rooming house in Dallas on Beckley, and his wife was living with Ruth Payne. I heard my sister talk about a woman that was living with Ruth Payne that had a child, and she was pregnant with a second child. But as things progressed and I worked really, I found out that that was Lee's wife. So very quickly, he and I came to agreement. He asked me, he says, would it be all right if I ride home with you? I said, sure, you can ride home any day, anytime you want to go. I said, I have to go out there every day. He said, well, you see, it's only going to be on the weekend. And I said, weekend? He said, yes, on Friday afternoon. And he would ride home with me on Friday afternoon and then ride back with me on Monday morning. Well, being a young boy, and I realized he was away from his family, I didn't want to take any of his time away from his family. So, answer to your question, did you ever do anything together on the weekend, Friday afternoon to Monday morning? The answer is no. We never went to the movies. We never stopped and had a beer and a sandwich and talked about what we did that week. Never. There's lots of rumors that I was seen with Lee at different places. I'm telling you, that's totally false. As I said, Lee was an excellent worker and a good person. And I once said the other day, matter of fact, just a little over a week ago, I was talking to a couple, and I told them, I said, Lee Oswald was a nice guy. He was always polite to me. He was very good with the children in the neighborhood, which were three of my little nieces were those children. And if you'd ask Lee a question, he'd always answer you. He's very polite and answer you. But Lee wasn't the type of person that would just come up to you and initiate a conversation. He wasn't a big talker. But the thing I did notice about him, when he did speak, he impressed me by the words that he would use in a sentence. And Lee only worked there at the Texas School Book Depository a short time. But in that short time, I told him, he asked me about some of the guys that worked there. And I told him, I said, well, you need to go in the break room, which you probably read and heard of as they call the domino room, where the guys would play cards, play dominoes, and eat their lunch. Well, I did eat in there a couple times. It was too noisy for me. So I always put my lunch down in the basement where it's nice and cool year-round. And on my lunch break, a lot of times I would go down and sit on a pallet of books. And sometime during the day, if I had been filling an order and I filled an order for a book and I looked at it and I liked it, well, I'd take a copy of that book and I would sit down on my lunch break and I would read just by myself. It was very soothing and relaxing, because while we were working, it was fast-paced. And getting back to what I said that Lee was, I thought, quite smart, was that back in those days, we didn't have the technology we have today. Where if you work in a distribution center, that's what they call them now, instead of warehouses, they're distribution centers, you get a printout, an order, it tells you exactly where the product is. Back in those days, was just the beginning of the computer era. We got the printout. The orders came off of a printer, much like they do today, but there wasn't any location of where that textbook was. So therefore, you had to be a fast learner, and you had to remember things, because you couldn't afford having someone take you around and show you where everything was. And Lee did a fantastic job in that. Like I said earlier, not to be repetitious, he learned very quickly. And it was a pleasure to teach him and work with him because he was such a good worker. And to say sometime go back to that time. Because I'm a time traveler. And if I could go back and change that day, I would. Because that tragic day, if you, for ones of you sitting in this room, are old enough to remember November the 22nd, 1963, we lost our president. We lost a policeman by the name of J.D. Tippett. His wife, Marie Tippett, I had the opportunity to meet her a week ago, last Thursday, and she's a fantastic person. A wonderful personality. On that day, she lost her husband, but 3 children lost their father. And this tragic day in November 1963 has impacted many people's lives. Most people just think about the Kennedy family. But it goes farther than that. And as I said, if I could change anything, this would never have happened. Because my true belief is, on that day, after that tragedy, I think America began to slide from God's grace. America is not what it once was 50 years ago. Just stop and think. Do you have someone who lives on each side of you that you don't even know what their name is? Maybe. You work with someone that you only kind of know, you really don't know. The point I'm trying to get is people don't care about anyone else but themselves. That's very sad. Where is America going? The way we're going now is not good. But there's enough of us alive that we can teach our grandchildren and that, hey, it has to stop somewhere. America can once be great again. And you know, talking about this, John Kennedy said in one of his speeches, he said, ask not what your country can do for you. What you can do for your country. And I think we must never forget that.
On the evening of the assassination, Louis Feldsot, who was the owner of Crescent Firearms, who imported Manashir-Kokana rifles into the United States, reported to FBI agents that Crescent sold an Italian rifle serial number C2766 to Klein Sporting Goods on June 18, 1962. On July 23, 1964, Feldsot provided an affidavit to the Warren Commission. Feldsot's affidavit conflicts with all the records related to the arrival, the reworking, and their subsequent sale to retail outlets such as Klein Sporting Goods. Importers of rifles, such as Crescent, were required by law to maintain a list of the serial numbers of rifles they imported into the United States. The retail purchaser, Klein's, was also required to keep a list of the serial numbers of each gun they purchased and resold to a retail customer. The tracking of an individual firearm from importation by Crescent to retail store, Klein's, and to a retail customer, in this case A. Heidel, was a simple matter of tracking serial numbers. The problem occurred for the FBI that Crescent sold C2766 to Klein's on June 18, 1962. The records that we currently have, allegedly obtained by the FBI, show that C276 was still in storage and not delivered to Klein's until February of 1963. By the time the FBI gives these documents to the Warren Commission, there's no carton numbers and there's no serial numbers of rifles. The absence of carton numbers prevented anyone from tracking C2766. In January 1962, Klein's placed orders with Crescent Firearms for 36-inch model Mannlicher Krokona rifles, which they advertised and sold from February 1962 to March 1963. When Heidel ordered an Italian rifle from Klein's using a coupon from the February 1963 issue of American Rifleman, he should have received a 36-inch rifle. Klein's only had 36-inch rifles from March 62 to March 63. That's all they had. So how did this guy get a 41-inch rifle? On the evening of the assassination, the FBI agents went to Klein's and looked at microfilm records from something like 10 o'clock in the evening to 5 o'clock in the morning. And from that microfilm, they allegedly printed Oswald's order documents for the Mannlicher Krokona rifle. The microfilm was never returned to Klein's. The microfilm is not in the National Archives. And all we have are photographs of alleged documents that were printed, allegedly, from Klein's microfilm. In reality, without the original microfilm, we have no idea what we've got. I don't think the rifle was purchased ever from Klein's. And the lack of documentation supports that conclusion. We can go on and talk about how Oswald received the rifle. There's no indication that he ever received a rifle. There's no written verification, no anything. There's not one person who said they saw Oswald carry a rifle, handle a rifle, purchase ammunition, purchase the clip, nothing. Transporting a rifle from Dallas to New Orleans, back from New Orleans to Dallas, nothing. The Warren Commission story is that Oswald buys this money order at the post office, mails the letter, and goes back to work, all in a half an hour. The problem was the front of the envelope that was allegedly mailed to Klein's, which the FBI provided to the Warren Commission, shows that it was mailed from a postal zone several miles from where Oswald's office was. Oswald would have to have purchased a money order, somehow gone to a mailbox several miles away for whatever reason, and returned to work within a very short time, half an hour. The last airplane that had mail service that day left at 12:30 in the afternoon from Love Field, and it arrived in Chicago 2:33 o'clock. The money order was written, mailed, and winds up at Klein's the following day. One day. Robert Wilmoth was the Vice President of Operations at the First National Bank of Chicago. He explained how a money order was routed after it was endorsed. The first endorsement, of course, being by Klein's, paid to the order of Klein's. Wilmoth said that when a money order was presented for deposit at a bank, the bank teller would stamp and date the money order with a First National Bank of Chicago endorsement. This would be the second endorsement. It would then be sent to the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago, where it would receive their endorsement and a date stamp. Finally, it would be sent to the Federal Postal Money Order Center in Kansas City, where it would again be stamped with a fourth endorsement stamp. According to Wilmoth, this money order should have had 4 separate endorsement stamps, but a quick glance at the postal money order shows that it was not stamped by the First National Bank of Chicago, Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Federal Postal Money Order in Kansas City. This money order was simply never deposited into any bank or financial institution. Who in Dallas, Texas, would have access to postal money orders following the assassination? There was a man that provided the FBI and the Secret Service with information following the assassination that nobody else knew, who allegedly looked at a stub of a postal money order, and the only one that looked at the stub of the postal money order and had the number of the postal money order, and he called the people in Washington, D.C. to try and find it. That was Harry Holmes, U.S. Postal Inspector in Dallas, Texas. Holmes said he found this money order stub, but he never produced it. No one ever produced it. If you were an employee of the United States Post Office and you found the stub that was allegedly used to purchase the rifle that killed the president, Wouldn't that be a valuable document? Interestingly enough, Harry Holmes never discussed postal regulations involving rifles when he was interviewed by the Warren Commission. Certain documents had to be filled out. Holmes never mentioned anything about that. And he's a postal inspector. The postal money order that Harry Holmes allegedly found a stub for, that information was relayed to a Donald Dugan, who instructed Postal Finance Officer J. Harold Marks to initiate a search for the money order in Washington, D.C. There's no logical reason that money order should be in Washington, D.C. It should be in Kansas City, Missouri, where Oswald's other money orders were found. These 5 money orders, and they're published in the Warren volumes, that Oswald bought at the same post office. The postal money order was allegedly found at the Federal Records Center in Alexandria, Virginia, by Robert Jackson, an employee of the National Archives. Everything about this case is in the details. Why is a postal money order at the Federal Records Center instead of in Kansas City, Missouri, where it should have been? What in the world is an employee of the National Archives doing locating this money order? The easiest way to show people that the rifle was never ordered or never purchased by Oswald is simply to look in the Warren volumes at that money order. Once you see that it has never been cashed at a bank, then you simply have to ask yourself, how in the world could this rifle have been ordered? Mailed to a post office box, signed or not signed, federal regulations regarding firearms, all those things are secondary. If you don't have a cashed money order, you don't have a purchase in the first place.
Just a matter of seconds after the third shot, and we ran across the shipping room floor, stopped at the elevator.
And we couldn't get that service elevator working, and he said, well, we use the stairs, and he turned around and immediately went up the stairs.
We ran on up the first flight to the second floor, and the officer looked in the snack bar adjacent to our office.
And I kind of looked off to the right over there through a doorway and saw an image of a man walking away through that doorway. And when I got to the doorway, he was on down there a little bit, and I hollered at him and asked him to come back.
The officer with me had a gun in his hand, and he threw the gun toward the middle of Oswald, and he looked probably a little startled, like anybody else would if you just put a gun in his stomach all at once, which I thought was natural.
I turned around and asked him if the man worked for him, and if he knew him. And he said, yes, said he works for me, and I know him. And at that time, the man never did say anything. I never did say anything further to him. I turned around and went on up the stairs to the third
time it
floor.
took you to get into the building and go up the stairs, and the time when you first saw Lee Harvey Oswald.
I believe, excuse me, from the time that I heard those shots and time I ran into that building, entered the lobby, and made it up to the second floor, it was approximately a minute and a half to 2 minutes.
The group of chapters that I'm going to play from my book, 1963, are meant as the entire sequence of chapters about Oswald to present Oswald in a documented, sourced way of the type of individual that he was, as well as the activities he was involved in. I think that's very important to compare the actual record to the confabulation and the exaggeration of a motif that was set up by the Warren Commission to demonize Lee Oswald. That was the purpose of my book. Chapter 41, Lake Pontchartrain, Bedeco Creek, Louisiana, Thursday, September 5th, 1963. Near Bedeco Creek, from atop a hill and within a mass of hanging vines and Spanish moss, Patch steadied the Bell and Howell camera on a log. Sherry gripped the metal canteen and with a bandana wiped the sweat off his brow. In the grassy field, soldiers in combat fatigues poured out of bulky military trucks. Patch filmed many of them carrying machine guns. Another group had mortars and bazookas. A thick foliage swamp lay beyond the field. Small arms fire popped across the field as the soldiers dived into the grass. Sherry whispered in his ear when the machine gun muzzles ignited orange. "That's live shooting, Patch." Patch kept filming and did not respond even when the mortars exploded a mere 100 feet away. Then he stopped the film and turned back to the log. He wound the camera again. "These people are well trained. Sounds like we're in the middle of a war," she said, blocking her ears at the next explosion. A group of men ran past them 50 yards away in the field. Patch lifted the camera and panned toward the Louisiana road sign. 5 men lingered near a jeep as other troops darted in the area beyond. Guy Bannister turned in front of the jeep. "That's Bannister. Over there, is that the man from Dallas, the one you call Phillips?" Patch slowly moved the camera just as Phillips stepped in back of a tree. To the left, Lee Oswald lingered next to a group of soldiers. In his fatigues, he appeared to look at the camera. Oswald, that same stupid smirk. Sherry spoke in a low voice in Patch's ear. "This is making sense now. Obviously Oswald works for the government." "Maybe," said Patch as he stopped filming. "Or the people in Texas somehow are using this as leverage." "Against the government? Don't know." Patch lifted the canteen. The water had a metal taste. He leaned against the tree until Sherry advised him Phillips had moved into the open. Unlike the others, Phillips wore street clothes and held a .45 caliber handgun. Patch cranked the bell and howl and then pushed the shutter button. More soldiers fired their weapons. He recognized the tall man in fatigues but could not access his name. This time they shot up targets in the shape of a man nailed to various trees, and the echoes reverberated across the swamp. Another man in fatigues ripped off one of the targets off the tree so they could see the bullet holes. "David Ferry," said Patch as he kept filming. "Either he cut his hair with hedge clippers or he's wearing a wig, and a bad one at that." Then Oswald aimed his rifle at the target. Patch counted 7 shots into the cutout. One of the soldiers marched toward the swamp, but Patch focused on the man with the glasses speaking with 2 men next to a telephone pole. Unlike most of the men, he wore white chinos and a white shirt. "Look how he's dressed. Intelligence officer of some kind," she said. Patch pulled out the amplifier rod and slipped the headphones over his head. He listened carefully for at least a half a minute as they talked about munitions and Castro. The second man called him by name, Tracy Barnes. "They're talking about the Valley getting low-frequency Motorola transceivers to David Ferry and Clay Shaw. Walkie-talkies with a 1/4 mile of range. More stuff about Castro and guns. There's a war going on down here. Nobody knows about it. For sure." He mentioned Jack Ruby and McWillie and how they used to get guns to fight Batista. He unscrewed the canteen cap and gulped more water. Then he handed it to Sherry. "That explains the guns in Jack's trunk. Last July, Barnes had some guy named Morris in Maryland order guns. Sonny's Surplus in Townsend, Maryland. Mannlicher Carcano, 7.35 surplus rifles. Bolt action, a whole bunch of them. And now they had David Ferry fly the guns somewhere. I didn't catch it. New Orleans? Okay, Ferry flew them to New Orleans." "Patch, there's more to Ferry than meets the eye. The point of those guns was to alter the 4-piece of each rifle. They dismantled them so they could be hidden and reassembled quickly. It sounds nefarious. I'll note that in my tape. Wait, they're moving out. On the Perende Road, right where we have the Impala." He looked up at her and ripped off the headphones. "We have to get out of here, right now. No argument here." He handed the amplifier and the other camera to her. Then he grabbed the 8mm. "I need to rewind this film and put it in the canister. Check through the binoculars, Sherry." She kept the glasses to her eyes as he flipped a switch and wound the film back into the camera canister. "Where are they?" "Rounding everyone up. Apparently they're going to march out." Oswald did tell Brengier in the clothing store that he'd trained men. I guess he was serious. "Okay, they're marching on the road, Patch." Patch unscrewed the cover, lifted the yellow and black Kodak canister from the camera, then re-screwed the cover. "Okay, let's go." He put the canister in his pocket and took her hand as they bent down. Hunched over, they moved into thicker brush. Memories of a battle and planes over a swampy area entered his thoughts. He envisioned men landing on a white sandy beach. The grassy ground moistened as they veered back toward the clump of trees where he had parked the Impala. Although the woods now appeared quiescent, there was enough firepower within that small training group to kill him and Sherry quickly. He pulled her up the grassy incline toward the twisted trees at the break. As they neared the crest, he spotted the red Impala 100 yards down the road shoulder. They trotted deliberately on the gritty road toward the red Chevy convertible. He opened the trunk and threw in the equipment without securing it in the suitcase. He started the car and immediately left a dust trail behind as he continued down the road's gradual incline. "I say we head straight. Doesn't that lead to Pontchartrain?" He took the wrinkled map from her hands. "There's an unpaved road along the lake. There's also a road leading away from the swamp where they're training. They were going the other way. I hope so. I sure hope so." Chapter 50. Lafayette Square Post Office, New Orleans, Louisiana, Wednesday, September 25th, 1963, 7:45 a.m. Patch carefully crossed the Lafayette Post Office's tile floor. Later he would buy some donuts and coffees for the hotel room. A greasy-haired man in khaki pants and a lightweight jacket lingered at one of the boxes. As Patch walked closer, he thought he had seen the man in one of the New Orleans bars, but he wasn't sure. The man pulled out a white single envelope and closed box 300061, Lee Oswald's box. The man locked the box and smiled at Patch as he passed. "Morning." "Morning," Patch answered as he stepped over to his own box. The man, maybe 5'8" or 9, walked up to the closed counter. He removed a brass key from his pocket and slipped it under the corrugated metal enclosure. Then, with the envelope in hand, he exited through the front door. Patch inserted his own key, and when he saw an empty box, he quickly closed it. Then he hurried back to the counter. When he saw the discarded key under the window, he ran over to the exit. Once at the front doors, he casually walked outside. But as he descended the stairs, the man from the post office stood in the park with two other dark-haired men, probably Cubans. He crossed the road diagonally and looped in back of the statue. As he inched closer in the morning stillness, the voices became clearer. The man from the post office said he needed to cash Oswald's unemployment check at the Winn-Dixie on Magazine Street. All three men scattered across the park. Patch rounded the statue and put his hands on his hips. He tried to put the pieces together as he backtracked to the Porsche. Oswald must have already left, as evidenced by the discarded post office key. Patch started the car and cut a course to Magazine Street. He was not quite sure about the location of the Winn-Dixie. As he drove and checked both sides of the road, he questioned how this Cuban would cash a check in Lee Oswald's name. Chapter 51, Laredo, Texas, Thursday, September 26, 1963, 1:06 p.m. Patch and Sherry arrived in Laredo, Texas, just after noontime. They nibbled on cheese sandwiches and sipped coffee at the noisy little Southland Cafe at the corner traffic light. His plan was simple. He would check the bus for Oswald and nod to Sherry by the Porsche as whether Oswald had arrived by the Houston bus. She would then mail the information to Pilatus's contact in Los Angeles. Patch would then ride the bus to Nuevo Laredo and enter Mexico. He would travel to Mexico City whether or not Oswald had boarded the bus. Patch held Sherry's hand along the sidewalk near the Hotel Hamilton. He gazed up at the multi-storied old hotel with its Spanish inlays and brick arches over the windows. "I'm afraid, Patch, that the CIA or FBI will grab you on that bus to Mexico City. I don't have much of a choice if Pilatus's people don't get that information in L.A. I wonder where Pilatus is right now. Probably in federal custody. Or dead. Got himself out of whatever operation he was in. That scares me too. We got sucked into this by Rosselli and his money. I'm not so sure. Rosselli talked to somebody and then immediately sent me to Vegas. Who knows who is coordinating what, Sherry? He could be just the relay for another party. Regardless, we're in this situation. I don't care about the money anymore." She held on to him as they approached a side news store. "What about Dallas? They want us in Dallas." He picked up the San Antonio Express near the open door and put down a quarter at the register. The little woman at the counter smiled and opened the register. She put the quarter in the machine as Patch studied the headline through the plexiglass. Senate ratifies nuclear test ban treaty 80-19. I wonder if the Russians will keep their side of the bargain. I bet you're not the only one thinking about that, he said back on the sidewalk. The Joint Chiefs and the Pentagon must be apoplectic. Apoplectic? You sound like Walter Cronkite. CBS News, said Patch, covering his left ear and lowering his voice. He smiled and folded the paper under his arm. Shari, you check into that hotel where we met Jim Pearl. The Cabana Motor Hotel. Right. I will call you once I'm back on the bus from Mexico City. Then I'll head right up to Dallas. You have Urselli's number, McWillie's number, and DeValley's number. If you see or hear anything related to Moon or anything else threatening you, call them right away. I also have the gun. Don't give Moon any breaks. He handed her Pilatus' request. Here are 2 letters in the envelope to the L.A. address. Use that mailbox at the terminal. I say he's not on the bus, Patch. Unknown, sweetness. She hugged him again. They just stood on the sidewalk for the longest time. A man in a tall Stetson hat stared as they headed toward the bus stop. Arm in arm, they passed a liquor store, and again he looked at his watch at the corner cafe. They moved along the parked cars back to the black Porsche positioned across from the bus stop. If Oswald is on that Houston bus, I'll give you the thumbs up, and if he's not, thumbs down. You're getting pretty sophisticated with those signals, Patchy. He held her shoulders and kissed her. How will I survive 2 days without you? She straightened his shirt collar. You just behave yourself, Mr. Kincaid. He held her hands and slowly backed away, but as he quickly moved forward, he kissed her again. Then he walked deliberately to the bus area. She waved at him from across the lot. Just before 1:20 p.m., the red and white Continental Railways bus number 5133, designated Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, rounded the corner. The sound of the brakes and the loud engine sent Patch's heart pounding. With Shari straddling the Porsche's door in the background, he checked the bus's windows but was unable to see inside as the bus squeaked to a stop. His face tightened as he realized he would actually have to get on that bus. Oswald might recognize him from the post office in New Orleans or Dallas. He placed a pair of reflective sunglasses over his eyes. 2 drivers were on bus 5133. After a few people got off the bus, Patch handed the ticket to the first driver. The driver, Claude A. Pyatt, ripped a receipt and handed it back. Patch knew Shari would report either way to Los Angeles. The corrugated rubber stairs gave the bus an industrial smell. As he nudged forward, he formed an internal snapshot. Within 10 seconds, he was fully aware that Oswald, a thin man with a dark receding hairline, had not traveled on the Nuevo Laredo bus. This is Robert P. Fitton, and I've been zooming back to the real history of 1963. Check out Fitton's Time Travel and all Fitton books at audible.com.